Sam Peckinpah, the most controversial film director you have possibly never heard of. Born in Fresno, California on February 21st, 1925, Peckinpah directed 14 feature films over the course of 22 years before dying on December 28, 1984. He was nominated for one Academy Award during his lifetime, that for Best Screenplay for The Wild Bunch, shared with Waylon Green and Roy Sickner. Great film, easily within my top 5, and I should know because I have impeccable taste.
Put it in your mouth. Now move your teeth up and down. Good, numbnuts.
Popeye's chicken is fucking awesome.
Peckinpah is best known for his use of slow motion paired with gratuitous violence. He was arguably the first director to utilize slow motion as a stylistic trademark, but what sets his use of the technique apart is his combination of slow motion with Eisenstein-style montage techniques, cross-cutting between multiple perspectives as a character dies, sometimes showing 2 or 3 separate events happening simultaneously. This creates a subjective and objective perspective of the violence happening within the scene. The subjective perspective comes from the character experiencing death at the moment of impact, captured in slow motion, while the objective world within the scene is captured in real time. This juggling of perspectives creates a disorienting and chaotic effect, placing the viewer in the middle of the action as an active participant rather than a casual observer. Arguably, without Peckinpah, the grammar for cinematic violence would be vastly different. His influence can be seen in the films of Quentin Tarantino, Catherine Bigelow, and the Wachowski sisters. And it's not Wachowski, it's Wachowski. They're from Chicago. That's how you pronounce it. Also, you think this is a hot dog? Get that Costco bullshit out of here. This is a hot dog. You call this pizza? This is pizza. Sadly, Peckinpah's career and legacy is so defined by this propensity for stylized violence that even Monty Python poked fun at it. The legacy of Peckinpah and his career has also been overshadowed by the legend of the director's personality. As regaled by biographers and those within his inner circle, Peckinpah's volatile temper and vindictive behavior frequently led to clashes with producers and collaborators. This was compounded by his extensive history of substance abuse. But this focus on the violence in his films, as well as the director's personality, do a disservice to the Peckinpahography. There are themes and criticisms worth examining that go beyond superficial observations of violence. For example, a minor reoccurring theme in the Peckinpahography includes religion, specifically Christianity, as heralded by individuals who are often dubious.
Radiation, that's an unfortunate dispensation.
It surely is. Yes, indeed.
As long as it's not another bomb. You're a scientist. Can you deny the responsibility?
Can you? After all, there's never been a kingdom given to so much bloodshed as that of Christ.
Or outright malicious in their behavior.
On your knees.
Kiss my ass.
But despite this portrayal, many characters in the Peckinpahography also sing the hymn, "Shall We Gather Round by the River?"
Shall we gather at the river?
Bother me.
Bother you?
All the way through it.
But the undeniable commonality throughout the entire Peckinpahography is violence. But what is this an expression of? Who perpetuates this violence? Who does the killing and who does the dying? And is there perhaps a historical context beyond the films? Violence as a means of conflict resolution is usually frowned upon in the real world. If my coworker was eating their Chicago deep dish pizza with their mouth open, I would have a really hard time trying to convince my supervisor that shooting them in the face was a justifiable course of action. In fiction, especially in film, violence is an acceptable form of conflict resolution. This is because film is a heightened art form. We understand that it's symbolic, and very rarely is a protagonist unmotivated in the pursuit of violent conflict resolution. Likewise, the violence perpetuated by Peckinpah's protagonists is never unmotivated. They're never the aggressors. Their use of force is always in relation to their environment, and they never target innocent bystanders. If a Peckinpah character does use unmotivated force, they're often in an antagonistic role. In the opening of The Wild Bunch, Pike Bishop and his gang rob a bank. They take it quietly, disguised as Texas Rangers to fit in, planning to get in and get out as discreetly as possible. It's the trigger-happy bounty hunters, led by Deke Thornton, who start shooting. In Straw Dogs, David Sumner is against 5 other men raiding his house. Even after David gives them an opportunity to back down.
Okay, you've had your fun. I'll give you one more chance. And if you don't clear out now, there'll be real trouble. I mean it.
They continue with their siege, forcing David to react in kind. In Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, Benny goes on a brutal, one-man crusade against those responsible for killing a loved one. Even though Peckinpah frequently made revisionist westerns, a subgenre that critiques the conventions of the traditional western, his characters, as flawed as they may be, still operate in a world of good guys versus bad guys. So it doesn't matter how gruesome the violence is always justifiable, which is a problem because violence is also the main way these characters demonstrate their dominance within the narrative. David starts off as a weak, timid man who avoids direct conflict with his harassers and his wife. However, after going on a hunting trip where he successfully shoots and kills a pheasant, he recognizes the fragility of life and his own inner power. David also learns that a man asserts his dominance over his wife and other men through violence.
One move, you son of a bitch. Slit your throat.
In the Ballad of Cable Hogue, the titular character is initially afraid to assert himself among his fellow party of travelers.
We had you shaken, didn't we, Cable? You damn fool. You had us.
Just wouldn't pull the trigger, because you're yellow.
They steal his water and his mule, leaving him to die in the desert. This leads Cable to discover a water reserve, which he then uses to create an oasis for travelers. When Cable later encounters a fellow traveler who refuses to pay for his fair share of water.
That's 10 cents. That's my water. My land. My water.
Here's your pay.
He has learned that might equals right in the West. In Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, multiple characters demonstrate their dominance through violence. Garrett is able to take in Billy through sheer force of numbers. Deputy Sheriff Bob Ollinger brutally asserts himself over Billy in reaction to the outlaw's defiance.
Repent, you son of a bitch.
But ultimately, Billy is able to prove himself the more dominant man by escaping his jail cell and killing the deputy sheriff with his own shotgun. In The Getaway, Doc McCoy is a cold-blooded thief, but he only kills people who actively threaten his and his wife's life. It is also demonstrated in several instances that Doc actively makes the decision to not kill certain characters who are weaker than himself, even though he could very easily do so.
Don't do it. Don't. Just run away. It's now. Run away!
Death is a constant presence in the Peckinpahography. It is often through death that Peckinpah's protagonists are able to achieve their highest point of salvation, whether they die by the end of the movie, kill a bunch of people by the end of the movie, or do both by the end of the movie. The Wild Bunch are able to reach their highest point of camaraderie and dignity through dying in a giant baptism of gunfire. Their decision to confront Mapache and the Mexican Federation Army, even when it looks like they have a clean break, not only allows them to avenge the death of a fallen colleague, but make a significant impact against the forces of modernity. In Cross of Iron, witnessing the deaths of his comrades forces Steiner to confront the injustices created by Stronsky, moving away from the neutral leanings he displayed earlier in the film. And while the film leaves their fates ambiguous, it's implied that Steiner and Stronsky charge into battle to die a glorious death, the highest form of honor for a 20th century soldier. Although Cross of Iron did get a sequel, so I guess that kills that interpretation. It's still headcanon to me! In Convoy, Rubber Duck, that's the main character's name by the way, appears to die and has a huge trucker funeral, but he is later revealed to be alive in what I feel is an allusion to the resurrection of Christ. He is found in a bus filled with literal Jesus freaks, for Christ's sake. You could slap that mug onto a badly photoshopped image of Christ, post it on Facebook, and your grandparents would leave a like and an amen. And with his name cleared, Rubber Duck is free to go wherever he pleases. After all, you can't arrest a dead man. In the Osterman weekend, John Tanner, who has been manipulated and jerked around in every which way but loose.
Every which way you look, there's action, adventure, and fun.
I'm telling you, it's up there with the Wild Bunch.
They insulted my ape. They'll pay for their crimes. Get the fuck out of my way! You cannot run me! I am the arbiter of ape justice! Look at what you've done to my baby boy!
After being jerked around by Facet, Tanner is able to take back control of his life by fooling Facet into revealing his location during a pre-recorded live broadcast. Tanner kills Facet, thereby saving his wife, his son, and the family dog. A+ dad material out of me. We need more dads who risk their lives to save their dogs. Who gives a shit about the wife and child? In fact, now that I think about it, this dad can go fuck himself. But why does Peckinpah portray violence this way? Why does he insist on making the violence as gruesome as possible? He has two explanations. Robert Ardrey was a playwright, screenwriter, and scientific writer best known for his Nature of Man series, which hypothesized that human behavior was influenced by the animalistic traits found in our common evolutionary ancestors. His work was incredibly popular in the 1960s and 70s, and were not only an inspiration for Sam Peckinpah, they also inspired Stanley Kubrick's work on 2001: A Space Odyssey and A Clockwork Orange. Peckinpah seemed particularly interested in African genesis, which hypothesizes that man evolved on the African continent from carnivorous, predatory ancestors who distinguished themselves from apes by the use of weapons, insinuating that man is an inherently violent species with an urge to dominate others and guard their territory. I'm not going to comment on the validity of Ardrey's writing or do any thorough debunking here. I have a bachelor's degree with a major in cinema arts and sciences, which means I'm pretty dumb. I have not read any of the Nature of Man series, and my only exposure to Ardrey's writing is through Google and Wikipedia. I will say though that African Genesis was published in 1961, 63 years ago as of this recording date. So I would personally take Ardrey's writing with a grain of salt. Whether Ardrey's writing is true or not doesn't even really matter, because Sam Peckinpah definitely believed it.
I think it's wrong and dangerous to refuse to acknowledge the animal nature of man. Ardrey's the only prophet alive today. I had to read it because Ardrey was writing about what I was dealing with, that we were both on the same track. I am a great believer in catharsis. Do you think people watch the Super Bowl because they think football is a beautiful sport? Bullshit. They're committing violence vicariously. People used to go and see the plays of Euripides and Sophocles and those other Greek cats. The players acted it out, and the audience got in there and kinda lived it with them. What's more violent than the plays of William Shakespeare? And how about grand opera? What's bloodier than a romantic grand opera?
I mean, sure, there's historical precedent for violent conflict in storytelling. But you do realize Shakespeare also wrote comedies, right? You do not need violence in order to achieve catharsis, nor is conflict violent by nature. Filmmakers like Ingmar Bergman, Charlie Chaplin, and Alain Resnais never had such conflicts in their films, all of whom you greatly admired, Sam, and their work can be just as cathartic. And what will Walt Disney have to say about that, Sam? Who you briefly worked for, by the way. Wasn't there a time when there seemed a possibility of you and Disney getting together?
He called me over to write a Shane-type picture called Little Britches. And I finally came up with the best script I've ever written. Walt read it and said too much violence and not enough dogs.
This line of thinking, that most stories throughout human history have been violent by nature, is completely arbitrary. It's also interesting to note that Peckinpah himself acknowledged that his feelings towards violent catharsis was misguided.
The effect your film can have on the cinema audiences can be dangerous, surely, because wasn't there not a case in the Nigerian Civil War when some of the soldiers watched The Wild Bunch and were so excited by it they started shooting and going out and saying they wanted to die like William Holden, in fact creating mayhem. Does that worry you that
Yes,
could have
it
happened?
does, very much, and I have to preface this with the fact that this was a French correspondent speaking honestly on what he'd seen. I made The Wild Bunch because I still believed in the Greek theory of catharsis, that by seeing this we would be purged by pity and fear and get this out of our system. I was wrong. If you've noticed, most of my films are now an increasing level of violence. Bit by bit, and you must take it away because it does no good. I was wrong. They did that. They were
really
attacking.
did, the soldiers.
Yes, they really did, and they were attacking for me for all the wrong reasons, and I stand corrected, and I am sick in my heart because of that. If one instance like that happened, it destroys what I was trying to do. Catharsis only works in certain, as Theodore Lips once said, it depends upon the viewer and his situation and the artist, and it was a total failure. I will not make again.
The second explanation is that we as a society have become desensitized to violence. We all know the story. Video games make boys horny, and books make girls violent.
You can't make violence real to audiences today without rubbing their noses in it. We watch our wars and see men die, really die, every day on television, but it doesn't seem real. We've been anesthetized by the media. What I do is show people what it's really like, not by showing it as it is so much as by heightening it, stylizing it.
Again, this line of thinking doesn't work. When we watch a movie or live theater performance, we know that what we are seeing is not real. It's a performance. That's the social contract between the audience and the artists. It's not like the audience is going to run out of the theater screaming after a character dies, because people understand the relationship between art and spectator. They may not consciously be aware of it, but they do know that what they are seeing is for their benefit on some primeval level. The only exception to this rule is if we're talking about a baby, and babies are fucking stupid. And Sam, come on. That's a bullshit argument. Curated news coverage of armed conflict, which you watch from the comfort and safety of your home, is not an equivalent experience to actually watching someone die right in front of you. Now, I'm not judging Peckinpah for this use of violence, but his reasons for embracing this style of violence are all arbitrary. However, there is an early entry in the Peckinpahography that proves the director wrong. New Wine, released in 1966 and made for the television anthology series ABC Stage 67, is about a struggling dairy farmer named Royal who hires drifter Olaf to work on his farm. Thanks to Olaf's help, the farm becomes successful, giving Royal and his family financial security. However, bounty hunter Homer Hatch comes to visit one day and informs Royal that Olaf is a wanted fugitive and he's come to collect the bounty. Royal doesn't want to give Olaf away, so when Mr. Hatch lunges at Olaf, Royal kills him. Running away from the scene of the crime, Olaf is killed in a manhunt, and Royal faces trial. Although he is acquitted, through a mixture of guilt and pride, he insists that he and his wife, Ellie, go door to door to provide his testimony. Royal insists that Ellie, a highly religious woman, should lie and say that she saw the whole thing in order to corroborate his testimony and justify his actions.
I'll say what you want me to, Mr. Thompson. But I will tell a lie, because I didn't see it happen. I saw the man lying on the ground and you with the axe and Mr. Hilton running. But I'll say what you want me to. I'll lie if that's what you want me to do.
It ain't what I want you to do, Ellie. It's what you have to do. But it ain't a lie.
But the whole thing proves to be a pointless endeavor because nobody believes Royal, not even Ellie or their children. What's worse, thanks to Royal's insistence on her testimony, Ellie believes that Royal has doomed her to damnation.
There was a time when my husband hadn't killed a man and made me lie for him. And I could tell the truth to anybody about anything. But now, life has become all one dread. And there's no place for me to go. Oh, sweet Jesus. I just don't know how to go on living anymore.
There's a lot of restraint in the violence of New Wine that is not present in the rest of the Peckinpahography. Because we are unable to witness the explicit depiction of violence, we examine how the act of killing corrodes one's self and how they are perceived by others. It also reveals the main motivation for violent action: greed. Because violence against others is an inherently selfish act, isn't it? It's either about fight or flight, which prioritizes your survival over everything else, including the well-being of others, or it's about asserting your superiority over others in the most straightforward, unimaginative way possible. While violence is often the central focus of retrospective evaluations of the Peckinpahography, male friendship is just as relevant. Often the most tender and empathetic scenes within his films are usually between men, but just as often, the betrayal of male friendship, usually through the introduction of capitalist forces, is the highest source of conflict within your typical entry in the Peckinpahography. In 3 of Peckinpah's most acclaimed westerns, the ever-growing industrialization of the western frontier makes one of our protagonists reluctantly join the forces of modernity, represented by a modern capitalist institution. In Ride the High Country, aging former lawman Steve Judd is hired by a bank to transport gold through the California mountains. He hires his old friend, Gil Westrom, to help guard the gold during transport, but Gil plans on stealing the gold during the trek. In The Wild Bunch, Pike Bishop is pursued by his old friend, Deke Thornton, who is coerced by a railroad agent to track down and kill Bishop under the threat of imprisonment. In Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid, aging former outlaw, now sheriff, Pat Garrett, recognizes that he must adapt to the times in order to survive.
I never figured to hear you brag on being a working man. Figured you for the law either. Just the way you're staying alive. No matter what side you're on, you're always right. And I aim to live to be rich, old, and gray.
So he accepts an offer by the Santa Fe Ring, a shadowy group comprised of politicians and cattle barons, in order to assassinate his old friend, Billy the Kid, who is cattle rustling in New Mexico. With each subsequent film, the role of betrayed and betrayer slowly shifts from the antagonist to the protagonist, subtly embracing moral ambiguity. Westrom intends to steal the gold, but we are still in the realm of traditional moral storytelling. His plans to steal the gold are thwarted, creating a rift between him and Steve, but receives redemption by the end of the film in carrying out the dying request of his old friend.
Don't worry about anything. I'll take care of it. Just like you would have.
Hell, I know that. I always did. You just forgot it for a while, that's all.
Thornton volunteers to track down Bishop, but he's under duress. It's made pretty clear that he would rather not hunt down and kill Pike. And he doesn't even kill Bishop. He finds his already dead corpse in the aftermath of a huge shootout that the film is most famous for. Pat Garrett actively, yet begrudgingly, lends his services to the Santa Fe ring to assassinate Billy the Kid, and does just that by the end of the film. This role of the betrayer has come full circle, from reluctant antagonist to proactive protagonist. This plot point is also present in Peckinpah films that were not as well received. Alliances and allegiances between male friends and male colleagues within Peckinpah films are easily broken and very frequently are tested within the film. It's also very rare to see these protagonists form new friendships within the narrative. And while the relationships between men in the Peckinpahography are fragile, their relationship with women is even worse. If violence is the most prevalent trademark found throughout the Peckinpahography, then it would be the director's misogyny that would be his second most prevalent trademark. The most infamous example of which is 1971's Straw Dogs. The film is about David and Amy Sumner, who relocate to her Cornish childhood village. At the peak of the counterculture era, tensions rise between the couple, thanks to David being a giant asshole.
Practically licking my body.
Who was practically licking your body?
Venner and Scott.
I congratulate them on their taste. Why don't you wear a bra?
Why shouldn't I?
Shouldn't go around without one and not expect that type to stare.
They also experience conflict due to Amy's desire for her husband to confront the harassment they are experiencing from the local townspeople. The film gained notoriety for its graphic violence, a trend mirroring other contemporary films like A Clockwork Orange, Deliverance, and Dirty Harry. For reference, the newly instituted MPAA had just replaced the Hays Code in 1967. Straw Dogs cemented Peckinpah's legacy as Bloody Sam, just as much, if not more so, than The Wild Bunch. The film has been highly criticized for its portrayal of dubious consent, which is demonstrated in the most infamous scene in the film, where it's highly suggested that the character Amy enjoyed a non-consensual encounter with her ex-boyfriend, immediately followed by a second, far more violent assault perpetuated by another man. Straw Dogs is a preliminary example of the common attitudes associated with culture. If you are somehow unaware of the concept of culture in the year 2024, I am assuming that you're a literal baby. What are you doing here, baby? Go watch Paw Patrol. Or don't. I don't know who you are. What do I know? What do any of us really know? But for the babies who are still here, culture is a society or environment whose prevailing social attitudes have the effect of normalizing or trivializing and abuse. This can be seen through the film's treatment of Amy. While Amy is presented as a character who is comfortable in her own sexuality and her own body, the film judges her for this, which takes form in the voice of David.
Shouldn't go around without one and not expect that type to stare.
As well as the camera, adapting a male gaze both to objectify Amy and to judge her.
Amy is the type of girl, and we've all seen them by the millions. They marry, they have some quality, but they're so goddamn immature, so ignorant as far as living goes, as to what is of value in life, in this case about marriage, that they destroy it.
But when she expresses discomfort at her objectification, the scene is not played with empathy.
Why don't you wear a bra?
Instead, the character is meant to be treated like a child, complaining about the consequences of their bad behavior.
Shouldn't go around without one and not expect that type to stare.
While Straw Dogs is the most infamous example of Peckinpah's treatment of female characters, this is a persistent pattern that shows up throughout the greater Peckimography. The most predominant female characters within the Peckimography, to use YouTube-friendly language, are loose women, whether this be literally, metaphorically, or both. This takes the form of female characters being unfaithful to their male romantic partners.
You know, Allie, your old man is really quite something. I wish I could offer you a better swap. Maybe I could give you dick on a 3-to-1 basis. What do you say?
They actively pursue infidelity with men who display traditional signs of masculinity or monetary capital.
I'm gonna marry me, the richest man in San Francisco. Maybe the 2 richest men. It's just a question of time.
These women are made to suffer for their transgressions, either through physical violence, emotional violence, or death. Even the act of solo female pleasure is reason enough for death. To go back to Straw Dogs for a quick moment, I believe that within the context of the narrative, as well as the greater Peckimography, that the most notorious scene in the film is not actually a depiction of even though it clearly is. Through the lens of Peckinpah, it is actually the most explicit depiction of female infidelity.
Amy is enjoying the experience, yes, at first. Doesn't Cale know anything about sex? Dominating and dominated. The fantasy, too, of being taken by force is one way people make love. There's no end to the fantasies of lovemaking, and this is one of them. Sure, Amy's enjoying it, at least with the first hombre who takes her. The second one is a bit more than she bargained for, but that's one of the prices she pays for playing her little game.
It's the same type of thinking that you find in male podcasters when they say that their girlfriends posting swimsuit pics is a form of cheating. And we know what that type of thinking is.
It's batshit insane!
Male infidelity, however, is not treated nearly the same. Pat Garrett is a married man, but he is able to enjoy a pretty gratuitous brothel visit without consequence. In Junior Bonner, McQueen's titular Junior steals Barbara Lee's character away from her man with no repercussions. Rubber Duck is even able to enjoy a polyamorous lifestyle. In a deleted scene from the Osterman weekend, John Tanner has an extramarital affair with his female producer, and she is the one who is killed. The only male protagonist to suffer any consequences for their involvement in infidelity is Major Dundee, where the titular character's behavior cost him the affection of his love interest, Teresa, who after this scene just completely leaves the film without warning, never to be seen again, which, in comparison to the punishments female characters receive, is barely a slap on the wrist. While the majority of the Peckimography features violence, both against men and women, the type of violence enacted against the two is completely different. Male death is often romanticized in the Peckimography. They are often portrayed being shot to death while firing their guns in the air, falling gracefully in slow motion. In comparison, the women are given no such dignity.
No!
Qué bueno está.
Where's the slow motion, Sam? Why does this guy, 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 and this guy, and this other guy, and this rando, why do they get slow motion? What are you trying to tell us, Sam? S.A. or the fear of SA, has also been a constant in the Peckhamography since the director's debut with The Deadly Companions. Patriarchy not only affects the women of the Peckhamography, it affects the men as well. Male cowardice in the face of conflict is a common motif, with men being shamed for avoiding direct confrontation with other men. David is afraid to confront his harassers. Cable is afraid to confront Taggart and Bowen. Treebig is intimidated into being Stronsky's lackey.
I can assure you of this. If you get caught, you will be hanged. Slowly. Both of you.
Making him complicit in Stronsky's crimes of stolen valor, which sees him punished in the slowest, motionist death in the entire Peckhamography.
I'm not saying that violence is what makes a man a man. I'm saying that when violence comes, you can't run from it. You have to recognize its true nature in yourself as well as in others, and stand up to it. If you run, you're dead, or you might as well be.
The best example of this is Harold from The Getaway. In this scene, which includes the antagonist Rudy and Harold's wife, Fran.
3 of us are going to do some traveling.
Oh, we can't leave here. I mean, that's not possible. I mean, we have all of this.
Is that possible, Mrs. Clinton?
Just tell us what you want.
What kind of a car do you drive, huh?
A Ford. We have a Ford.
It's very good, Harold. Now, you run out and gas up the Ford. Anybody but you comes back, Harold. She gets her clock stopped.
You do what he says, Harold.
Do what I say.
A modern audience can interpret the scene as Fran protecting her husband's life, along with her own, but the movie wants us to interpret Harold as weak for not standing up for himself, and Fran for being an unfaithful spouse for complying with Rudy's demands. Because of this, not only are the two of them dragged around the country by Rudy, Fran obliviously becomes a willing accomplice to Rudy's crimes and leaves the beta cuck Harold for the alpha Chad Rudy.
Thanks.
This is all fucked up, right? You are not weak if you are afraid to stand up to a big scary man with a gun. You are not complicit if you have to comply with the demands of a scary man with a gun. The only one at fault in this situation is the big scary man with the gun. Now, having said all this, I actually believe that Peckinpah is one of the most interesting directors to portray the dynamics and complexities of romantic partnerships. The romantic partnerships featured in his films are deeply flawed, much like real-life partnerships. And while Peckinpah is preoccupied with female infidelity, the male characters are just as often highly controlling and suspicious of their female partners, which in and of itself reveals the insecurity at the heart of these masculine characters.
I think you'll like it, Willie. I think he got to you.
Maybe. At least I got to him.
Infidelity and trust even form the basis for two of Peckinpah's best films. I don't think it's any coincidence that Ally McGraw was cast as the female lead in The Getaway. I mean, realistically, it probably is, but it's so good of a coincidence that it can't help but feel intentional. McGraw had previously starred in Love Story, which was not only incredibly popular and successful in its time, but it's also the progenitor of this famous line.
Jenny, I'm sorry.
Don't. Love means never having to say you're sorry.
Which is the antithesis of The Getaway, a story that shows the sacrifices romantic partners need to make in order to keep their relationship alive, actions which can simultaneously hurt those very same loved ones in the process. But despite the messiness and conflict between these characters, it's clear that they love each other. For this reason, films like The Getaway and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia feel much more grounded than a lot of other movie romances.
Hey, what makes you so sure I went to prep school?
You look stupid and rich.
Numerous entries of the Peckinpahography feature characters navigating complex relationships, whether they be between men or women, and they are often on the move when they do so. Travel is essential to the Peckinpahography. Many of Peckinpah's films can be summarized as his protagonists going on a quest in order to escape the influences of modernity, specifically capitalism. To paraphrase a passage from author Ron Felton's book, Sam Peckinpah and the American Road Movie, Peckinpah's movies are unique because his protagonists often seek mobile refuge to restore their values, similar to how a cult leader might establish a compound in a remote area to avoid societal influence and legal constraints. While his book specifically focuses on 3 entries of the Peckinpahography, Felton's assessment also resonates across the greater Peckinpahography. This pursuit of mobile refuge often features the protagonist obtaining capital in order to achieve their goals. The Wild Bunch flee from an ever-growing industrial United States, deciding to pull off one last job by robbing a United States arms train. Cable Hogue achieves financial stability and independence through his water spring in the Nevada desert. David is able to relocate to England thanks to the help of a generous university grant. Doc and Carol make their way towards Mexico after robbing a bank. Benny travels through rural Mexico, pursuing a lead to dig up a dead man's corpse in order to make some easy money and retire with his partner. We follow Billy as he makes his way to an abandoned Fort Sumner in order to escape the laws of civilization, which is formed through a combination of capitalists and political interests, personified by the Santa Fe Ring. This is contrasted with Garrett, who lives in a house in Lincoln County with his wife. We even have fence imagery scattered throughout the film, representing the closing of the western frontier, as well as a cage for both Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. And when the film is not about characters actively pursuing mobile refuge, they tend to have a home or a safe space that appears to be isolated from the rest of civilization. In The Osterman Weekend, the main character and his family live in an isolated home located in the hills of Southern California. In Major Dundee, the main character is relocated to a bar after receiving an arrow to the knee.
I used to be an adventurer like you. Then I took an arrow in the knee.
Where he is nursed back to health and falls in love with his nurse. In The Killer Elite, the main character is temporarily relocated to the hospital after...
I used to be an adventurer like you.
Where he is nursed back to health and falls in love with his nurse. In Cross of Iron, the main character is temporarily relocated to a hospital where he is nursed back to health and... Oh hey, we have another reoccurring theme here. I'm sure you could guess what happens next.
And a sense of taste.
But you can see how this goal of attaining mobile refuge through monetary capital would be incongruous, right? While Peckinpah's protagonists usually strain against the conventions of society, their ultimate escape from civilization is the ultimate invention of civilization. It's like making a peanut butter and mayonnaise sandwich. But you don't particularly like peanut butter, so instead of switching to an almond or hazelnut butter, you just mask the taste of the peanut butter with an extra large helping of mayonnaise. Like, yes, you fix the problem,
but you're still eating peanut butter.
Peckinpah's characters don't have a problem with capitalism, you see. They just want to be the ones in control. They want to recreate the rules and systems of capitalism on their own terms, so that way they are the beneficiaries of the system. So it's interesting to compare the films of Peckinpah with one of his many cinematic disciples. John Milius, best known for his work on Apocalypse Now and Conan the Barbarian, takes Peckinpah's ideas of mobile refuge to its most logical conclusion. While Peckinpah's protagonists never take the plunge to create their own worlds out of whole cloth, Milius's protagonists often abandon civilized society and create their own worlds free from democracy and capitalism. The life and times of Judge Roy Bean follows a former outlaw who appoints himself the judge of a Texas town, ostensibly creating his own civilization, where he is free to dispense his own version of law and justice.
All men stand equal before the law. And I will hang a man for killing anyone, including
There's no place in that book that's...
Trust in my judgment of the book. Besides, you're gonna hang no matter what it says in there, because I am the law.
The film is also responsible for giving us this gem of a moment. Jeremiah Johnson, whose greatest cultural legacy is providing us with this gif, follows the titular protagonist as he pursues the life of a mountain man in the Rockies. Apocalypse Now is about a soldier whose mission is to assassinate a man who defected from the United States Special Forces and created his own civilization in the jungles of Cambodia. Farewell to the King is about a United States World War II soldier who defects from his country and creates his own civilization in the jungles of Borneo. You might have noticed a pattern in the miliography. A Euro-American creating their own society within a land largely populated by indigenous people.
He's a white man, my God. He's as white as we are.
Yeah, as it turns out, when you take Mobile Refuge to its most logical conclusion, you get colonialism. But Peckinpah's preoccupation with Mobile Refuge has its own can of worms when you put Mexico in there. Peckinpah's characters view Mexico as comparable to the United States during the Western frontier, free from the technological and political advancements of the 20th century, which in so many words can be summarized as simpler, which is a historically inaccurate and racist assumption. Throughout his life, Peckinpah was enamored with Mexico and its culture. His films were often shot on location in Mexico, regardless of their setting, and the country plays a huge part in the visual landscape of the Peckinpahography. But Peckinpah's depiction of Mexico is less than flattering. Now, I'm not an expert on Mexico. I've never been to Mexico, I don't know the history of Mexico, and I don't have any family in Mexico. The only knowledge I have of Mexico is its depiction in Hollywood cinema. Mexico in the Peckinpahography is often squalid, with half-demolished buildings, surrounded by impoverished peasants, thick accented antagonists, female characters who range from sexless old women to hypersexualized young women, and just a ton of children and babies running around. I don't have a problem with babies, but they're everywhere. Peckinpah's preoccupations with morally ambiguous antiheroes, violent subject matter, and his own misogyny already complement popular stereotypes of Mexico and Mexicans that follow them to this day.
When Mexico sends its people, they're not sending their best. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists.
These representations originated during the early days of Hollywood, largely informed by the Mexican Revolution, as depicted in American newsreels, circa 1914 to 1918, the Hollywood of Charlie Chaplin, D.W. Griffith, and Lillian Gish. While Peckinpah wasn't the progenitor of these tropes, his films have reinforced the way American audiences view Mexico. One of Peckinpah's favorite films, as well as a cinematic landmark in its own right, is The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. Released in 1948 and directed by John Huston, a group of expat Americans residing in Mexico on the margins of society decide to band together with an elderly prospector in order to find gold and make their fortune. Films like The Wild Bunch and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia can even be considered as spiritual successors to the Huston film. And the shadow of Huston's film looms large over popular culture. Even if you haven't seen this film, you have definitely seen some variation on this scene.
We are federales, you know, the mountain police.
If you're the police, where are your badges?
Badges? We ain't got no badges. We don't need no badges. I don't have to show you any stinking badges.
Badges? We don't need no stinking badges. Oh, no.
If you're so official, why don't you show us some papers?
Papers. We don't need no stinking papers.
You aren't deputies. Where's your badges? Badges? We don't need no stinking badges.
Where are your official badges? We don't need no stinking official badges.
Passes? Passes? Starscream! I don't have to show you no stinking passes.
Papers? We don't need no stinking papers.
Class? We don't need no stinking class.
We don't need no stinking dentist.
We don't need no stinking school. Yeah.
Forgiveness. I don't need your stinking forgiveness.
Who gave you the codes?
What codes?
Codes? We didn't need no stinking codes.
Relationships? We don't need no stinking relationships.
Badgers? Badgers? We don't need no stinking badgers.
Media informs the way that we view the world, which therefore informs the way artists portray groups outside of their lived experiences, which therefore perpetuates these stereotypes even further. This is why media representation matters, because these images, some of which were created over 100 years ago, are still prevalent to this day.
Gracias, señor.
There's a lot of politics in the Peckinpahography. Capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, all the good stuff. But this is all subtext that I gleaned from looking at the Peckinpahography as a greater whole. When his films get dangerously close to being political, the scene is either undercut by the situation at hand, or the character who is expressing these opinions.
Well, we share very few sentiments with our government.
This would have resonated with politically minded audience members when the film was released in 1969. The anti-war movement against the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War was at the forefront of the minds of many Americans, which was created during Lyndon Johnson's single term as president, which paved the way for Nixon to win the 1968 presidential election. But then in Cable Hogue, you have this scene. Like, come on, Sam, that's just confusing. And upon closer inspection, the previous scene can be called into question. Any potential political commentary is compromised because the characters are in conversation with professional Wario impersonator Emilio Fernandez. There is also the unfortunate reality that some contemporaneous audience members would interpret this scene,
Well, we share very few sentiments with our government.
as being critical of Johnson passing the Civil Rights Acts of 64, 65, and 68. I mean, the majority of his protagonists are old white men, and the antagonists are Mexicans and Germans. And before you say, Alex, you're clearly overthinking all of this, my response to that is, I'm autistic! I literally overthink everything! It's in my DNA! But Peckinpah himself was actually a very politically minded person who hated Nixon and bemoaned the Democratic Party at a time when they promoted people like Hubert Humphrey and George McGovern for president.
You left because you didn't want to take a stand. Commit.
Peckinpah understands that politics influences everyone, so not taking a clear political stand is for people who are weak, like David. While the scene can be easily interpreted in this way, it's Amy who is expressing this sentiment, and we already know how Peckinpah feels about her. Another example of this can be found in Convoy.
You're gonna be one of us pretty soon, you know.
How's that?
Ain't you heard? The Teamsters are gonna be organizing the cops.
Not this one. I don't want no part of your damn union.
It ain't my damn union, Lyle. I'm independent, remember?
At least we got one thing in common.
How can you not interpret that as anything other than political? This is the most political statement in any Peckinpah film. Which is ironic because the majority of the conflict in the movie is solved through collective action. When Rubber Duck accidentally creates the convoy, he insists there is no political intentions behind it.
Now, is this convoy some sort of protest demonstration? And if it is, what's its purpose?
The purpose of the convoy is to keep moving.
But claiming that something isn't political is a highly political statement. All stories are inherently political because all stories are about the human condition. Centralism and apoliticism only benefit the oppressors of society. This is further complicated by the film combining genuine political grievance and unreliable commentary from Duck's fellow truckers, compromising any interpretation in its messaging.
I'm tired of seeing the way black people have to live. Went to Vietnam and got shot for the right to live in a ghetto.
I'm not telling you how to run the country, but this whole 55 double nickel was a jive-ass turkey rap. And I don't like people giving me bullshit.
Sir, I wonder if I could ask you why you're out in this convoy with a Rubber Duck.
Well, I'm just along to kick ass and for the ride.
Yeah, but certainly you must have some kind of personal grievance against the laws of this state.
No, I just like kicking ass. You sure are a pretty red-headed little boy. Want to ride in my truck? Watch this!
It's stuff like this that could take potentially poignant political commentary into toothless entertainment. This is thoroughly exemplified in Peckinpah's 1977 war film, Cross of Iron. Cross of Iron is unusual in that it's one of the few World War II movies that shows the conflict through a sympathetic portrayal of the Nazis. That sounds really bad, and it is, but there's a little more nuance to it. The film implicitly endorses the myth that the Wehrmacht was separate from the Nazi Party, that they were just following orders and serving their country. This is reflected in the film through its characters.
Didn't your Fuhrer say that all class distinctions were to be abolished?
I am an officer of the Wehrmacht. I have never been a party member. I'm a Prussian aristocrat, and I don't want to be put into the same category.
So we agree for once.
Who are all battle-weary soldiers fed up with the war, who are not fighting for any grand ideology, instead fighting for their own survival and personal ambitions.
I don't care what you believe, what you've done. Your duty is to us, the platoon, and me. Fulfill those responsibilities, or you will have a bayonet up your ass.
The film is more interested in showcasing the horrors of war, the hypocrisy of men who make war, and the camaraderie forged by men through their shared wartime trials.
I learned after Stalingrad. Natural body oils combined with dirt can keep you waterproof. Natural body oils.
The only true Nazi in the movie, who is explicitly mentioned to be a believer of the Nazi Party, yeah, he gets his dick chewed off. But this myth of just following orders was also propagated by surviving members of the Nazi Party and Nazi sympathizers to absolve themselves of their knowledge and participation in the Holocaust. James Coburn explained his and Peckinpah's approach to the subject matter in the following section.
We were going through all the various files and film of the time. It was really difficult to get an accurate view of that time that wasn't prejudiced in one way or the other.
We saw cut from the same stock, a captured German war film that had been used for propaganda, and a Russian propaganda film cut from virtually the same stock.
It was very interesting to see what amounted to the same shot edited differently to be used by two totally different ideologies for their own purposes. So what we realized, and this really hit Sam, was that they were both liars. The truth, if there is a truth, has to be somewhere else.
So, turns out the cast and crew were accidentally propagating Nazi propaganda. Oopsie daisy. But let's back up for a moment there. I don't believe that Peckinpah and Coburn deliberately made a film to paint the Nazis in a sympathetic light. They clearly wanted to make a film-balanced, prototypical war movie from an unconventional perspective. That's not meant to excuse the film's faults, it's just that they were unintentionally malicious instead of deliberately malicious.
Basically, I felt that it was a story of every common soldier. I'm doing a story about the universal soldier more than anything else, what I'm trying to do. Their training was
was strictly a very formalized training that went on for years. While I think both the British and American armies were civilian armies. We were civilian soldiers. The Germans were soldiers almost from birth and believed that they lost World War I. Hitler built up a whole propaganda machine and helped the generals convince the people that they were betrayed. And that's why he brought in all this anti-Semitism and nonsense.
As flawed as Peckinpah's protagonists may be, they are still the good guys, and Peckinpah is unable to deviate from that pattern. You can still empathize with the character who either does or believes in horrible things, because the truth is that people have motivations and reasons for their actions. They may not necessarily be logical, healthy, or even good as we define it, but they can be understood on some level. Exploring taboos and the darker sides of humanity is one of the main purposes of art and fiction. So what's the point of having a movie that takes the perspective of Nazis if it refuses to examine Nazism? It doesn't even critique or show the audience the things that Nazis are commonly associated with. I can't help but be reminded of the movie Come and See, which takes the opposite approach to its portrayal of Nazism. While Cross of Iron portrays the Nazis with an uncritical eye, Come and See depicts them as a mythic, almost supernatural evil force. Their presence only hinted at, cloaked in fog and shadow, only seen in glimpses, until they are properly revealed in the horrifying third act of the film. Though neither portrayal is particularly nuanced, Come and See's approach is warranted because the film is shown from the perspective of those who experienced the horrors of the Nazis, something the director, Ilym Klimov, personally experienced himself.
Дело в том, что я родом из Сталинграда. Мальчиком, естественно, я был и видел и вот эти бомбежки, и вот поэтому дело в том, что у меня остались очень сильные детские впечатления от этого времени, от этого ада. Я действительно побывал в аду. Вот, и это навсегда осталось, и до сих пор живет во мне. И вот я все время думал, я обязан снять этот фильм.
Also, unlike Cross of Iron, the movie is not concerned with entertaining its audience.
Была задача сказать правду, потому что к этому времени уже много времени прошло после войны. В основном это про войну стали делать военные приключения или партизан-фильмы, мы их так называли, где, в общем, так сказать, занимательность сюжета в основном, так сказать, на первый план выходила. А вот эти страшные, так сказать, подробности настоящей войны, они очень редко попадали на экран. Это нужно сказать, чтобы люди знали, как это будет, потому что когда теряется память, то теряется и будущее, потому что, значит, нет защиты у нового поколения от того, что может произойти.
But let's move on to one of my favorite subjects, unmade films. You know what I mean. Kubrick's Napoleon, Jodorowsky's Dune, Burton's Superman. Peckinpah was no stranger to this either. There are dozens of unmade films whose scripts are available for research purposes through the Academy of Motion Pictures Library archives. Many of these unproduced entries in the Peckinpahography also reinforce the themes we examined earlier. I should specify that this section is purely speculative on my part. I have not read any of these scripts, and my plot synopses of them are based on whatever scraps of information I've been able to gather on these projects, as well as my own interpretations of the Peckinpahography. Castaway, based on the novella by James Gould Cozzens, would have been the story of Mr. Leckie, seemingly the only human left alive after an unknown apocalypse, who takes shelter in a deserted department store. While at first all of his material needs and comforts are met, Slowly, over time, his mental state deteriorates as his loneliness and paranoia start to seep in. The story is described as a modern parable of Robinson Crusoe, with philosophical, psychological, and mystical implications. While Castaway would have been very different from Peckinpah's usual films, it still features his interest in mobile refuge, as well as a protagonist who uses monetary gains in order to escape a capitalist society. As Mr. Leckie retreats to the department store, once a haven of consumerism, he eventually realizes how hollow his life is within those narrowly defined parameters, proving that meaning and purpose within a capitalist society built on material gains is impossible. But that is me reaching. The Texans would have been a contemporary Western that Peckinpah signed on to direct in 1980. The story would have followed an aging Texas oil executive who, on the evening of his retirement, enrolls himself and his junior executives, one of whom happens to be his own son, on an old-fashioned cattle drive through the Chisholm Trail. Not only do we have mobile refuge as a means to escape capitalism, we also have a somewhat new dynamic for Peckinpah. While the Peckinpahography frequently portrays the dynamics of male friendship, Peckinpah rarely portrayed the dynamics between father and son. Peckinpah himself was a father of 5 children and featured his son, Matthew, in 4 of his films. So this would have been an interesting dynamic for Peckinpah to cover. Sam Peckinpah was friends with Western novelist Max Evans. Peckinpah held his friend's work in high regard, and Evans, in turn, wrote 2 books about Peckinpah. They collaborated on a number of scripts for films that never came to fruition, the most notable of which would have been an adaptation of Evans's novel, The High-Low Country. The story follows Pete Calder and Big Boy Matson, 2 cowpunchers in late 1940s era Arizona, who both fall in love with the married Mona Burke. High-Low Country did eventually get produced as a film, unlike these 2 losers. Directed by Stephen Frears and written by Waylon Green, the same guy who wrote The Wild Bunch. He was also that guy that had a millipede crawl all over his face in the tunnel scene in the Willy Wonka of the Chocolate Factory.
I knew Mel, of course, because we worked together. And Mel came over, he said, I want to show you this sequence. And he said, because the studio hates it. And he said, do you have anything? And I said, yeah, I got some stuff that might work. Maybe we could do this tunnel thing. And I said, get the big millipede. We had a big millipede. They're harmless.
What a sick freak! The story features themes and motifs right up Peckinpah's alley. The encroaching presence of modernity upon the western frontier, isolated locales away from civilization, the dynamics of male friendship, and even female infidelity. But for me, the most interesting unmade Peckinpah film is Cuckoo's Progress. Based on a novel by Sture Dahlstrom titled Yekmenen. The story is about Xerxes Sonson Pickelhaupt, a man obsessed with populating the world with his progeny, who opens a clinic to help women conceive through natural methods, all while engaging in multiple slapstick inseminations, the world's first sperm theft, circa 1970s, and Sonson's ongoing war with his arch-nemesis simply known as the Car Man. The idea of Peckinpah making a straight comedy, especially with a premise as out there as Cuckoo's Progress, is irresistible. But I don't think it would be a good movie. In fact, it sounds awful, but that's right up my alley.
Perhaps a titty twister will loosen your lips.
Oh, hey, I'm getting turned on.
But wait, Alex, I hear you say. Sam Peckinpah making a comedy movie? Not as outrageous as you would think.
Really?
Many films in the Peckinpahography feature comedy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the comedy was funny. His comedy is often clumsy and ham-fisted.
Got lots of girls?
Yeah, tons of them. I send my extras over to Turkey for harem duty.
I'm a virgin.
Well, that's very nice. I really don't have time for your confessions right now. I don't want this to sound too harsh, but to tell you the truth, I really don't give a shit, all right?
Or straight up sexual harassment. Peckinpah was at his best when the humor in his films was quietly sardonic.
You
crazy, murderous bastard.
Try to think of them as fleas on a dog that gets hit by a stolen car driven by a drunk teenager whose girlfriend's just given them the clap. It will help your perspective.
Or provided texture to the characters and the world that they lived in.
Say, you wouldn't happen to be a Mormon, would you?
There are tons of interesting unmade films that Peckinpah was involved in. An adaptation of the Ray Bradbury novel, Something Wicked This Way Comes, John Graves' The Last Running, collaborations with Elmore Leonard and Stephen King, as well as other various projects such as... I feel that it's important to bring up these unmade films, not because I think they're interesting, which I do, but because Peckinpah clearly wanted to make films that went beyond his image as Bloody Sam. Because of his combative nature and unreliability, Peckinpah never had that much clout in Hollywood. He wasn't a director like Hitchcock or Kubrick, who predominantly worked for one studio, who essentially wrote them blank checks for whatever film they wanted to make. That's hyperbole, by the way. Don't take it literally. So Peckinpah had to accept offers to direct films that fell within his image as Bloody Sam.
I've never picked any of my films. Except one, The Ballad of Cable Hogue. That's the only movie I ever picked to do. I'm a whore. I go where I'm kicked, but I'm a very good whore.
Let me tell you something about being a good whore. The difference between a good whore and a bad whore is very simple. One makes you think that it's important that you stay alive, and the other makes you think that you wasted your money. I'm a good whore. I've been taught by experts.
That's how you get films like The Killer Elite, Cross of Iron, and The Osterman Weekend, because that's what people were interested in seeing from Peckinpah. Nobody wanted to see him make Castaway or The High-Low Country. That's kind of what happens when you act like an asshole to everybody. Eventually, you just alienate everyone, except for the people who want to make a Sam Peckinpah film, instead of a film made by Sam Peckinpah, which is a huge difference.
Whatever material you are given to work on, you then proceed to make into your own picture. There's certainly no mistaking the Peckinpah touch.
The Peckinpah touch. Jesus! Once I'm handed something to do, then I take the material and try to work something out of it. What I put into it is what I see, how I feel about how things are, or the way they are going. But I try to tell a story, above all, in terms of the material I'm given, and very seldom have I been given a decent piece of material.
The appeal of the Peckinpahography does not lie within the director's portrayal of graphic violence. Those kind of films are commonplace now, and have improved upon the techniques he pioneered. The appeal lies in characters who are caught in systems of power beyond their control or understanding, as we all are. We work long hours for wages that can't keep up with the rising cost of living, despite the fact that we are the richest nation in the world. Our democracy is teetering into the abyss of fascism. The world is suffering from a pandemic that has claimed an estimated 18 to 33 million lives. That is still a thing, by the way. It never left. We just decided that we were not going to care about it anymore. Yeah, sucks about your dad dying and all, but business still got a business, am I right? Not to mention that our planet is very literally on fire, all because corporations have more influence over our lives than our own government does. So it's no wonder that what all of us really want is to live a real-life version of Stardew Valley. To live a quiet, simpler life, where I can make and sell my artisan cheese, pet my dog, and live with my partner. Yeah, I'll admit it, I have bad taste. We are all Peckinpah protagonists in one way or another. This is why Sam Peckinpah is still relevant. That is why his films have endured. If you've gotten this far into the video and you are still watching, then thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you watching. If you like this video, maybe leave it a like, a comment, or if you're feeling generous, even subscribe. You can also check out my Patreon if you want. I have a lot of things coming up that I'm working on, and I'm really excited to share them with you all. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a lovely day. Bye.
Ugh. Oh, God. Ew. Oh, I'm dying here.
Like, this is actual bourbon, by the way. This is not, like, tea or anything. Like, straight up. Ugh.